Well, are you happy to be back? We've really missed you. Your pictures are beautiful, but it's not as good as the real thing. I hope you're as happy to be here as I'm happy to have you here. Today we celebrate the first public Mass in our parish since March 14th. Can you believe that? March 14th, almost 3 months. That is a real reason to rejoice. I know we're Catholics here, but can I get an alleluia? Alleluia! All right. Now, you know, in the old days, when something really great like this happened, the priest would send a bunch of kids up to the bell tower to jump on the rope and ring the bell, so the whole town would know that the war ended, or the plague ended, or Mass was back. Now, we don't have a bell tower, so I asked Kayla and Joe to come today to play music. You don't usually have music at a daily Mass, but I wanted music, at least on this first day back, to make today extra special, because today is indeed a day to rejoice. In our first reading tonight, the prophet Elijah goes to the widow of Zarephath and he says, "Please give me some bread." He's hungry. Isn't that kind of what all of you have been saying for about 3 months? Give us some bread. I mean, I've had it every day, but you haven't. Now, of course, you weren't asking for ordinary bread. You were asking for the bread of angels, the bread of life, the bread that comes down from heaven. Jesus in the most holy Eucharist. You've been deprived of it for almost 3 months. And at long last, the day has come when you will all be able to receive the bread of life. And boy, do we need that bread if we're going to be the people that we're called to be. Don't we need it? Sometimes you don't realize how much you need it until it's taken away from you. You know that the first American-born saint, Elizabeth Ann Seton, who converted to the Catholic faith because she wanted to receive the Eucharist, once said that if she went even one day without receiving the Eucharist, she became like a beast. That's how dependent she was on the Eucharist. One day without it, she became like a beast. Try 3 months. We need the Eucharist if we're going to be the people that we're called to be. And in today's Gospel, Jesus tells us the type of people that we're supposed to be. He tells us to be light for the world. You are the light of the world, he says. Your light must shine before others. It's the Eucharist that empowers us to be people of light. Let me tell you a little story. A number of years ago, NASA was experimenting with a new type of camera that could detect energy levels in a human body. Now, I'm no expert in technology or science, but from what I'm told, this camera that NASA was experimenting with, it could detect energy levels, and up on a monitor, you could see the energy levels in a person by a bright aura of light that appeared on the monitor around that person. So if a person was very alive and had lots of energy, there'd be a bright aura of light around them. And when NASA would experiment with this camera in hospitals on people who were dying, they actually found that as people got closer to death, that aura of light grew dimmer and dimmer on the monitor. So at one point, a NASA scientist and his assistant were experimenting with this camera on a dying man in a hospital from behind a one-way mirror. So they couldn't be seen by the people in the hospital room, but they could film the man who was dying, and they could see his energy levels on this monitor. And as he got closer to death, that aura of light grew dimmer and dimmer in him. Well, one day as they were observing this man, a visitor walked into the hospital room, and when the visitor walked into the hospital room, the two scientists who were observing the dying man saw a bright aura of light coming out of the pocket of the visitor. Really bright aura of light. So they ran from their observation room into the hospital room because they wanted to see what was producing this light. And you know what they found? The visitor was a Catholic priest. And when he had taken out of his pocket whatever it was that was producing this light, he had opened it, and they saw on the screen that the whole room filled with light. And when they went into the room to see what was producing that light, you know what they discovered it was? It was a pyx. That's a little gold container that holds the Eucharist. And when that pyx was opened with Jesus and the Eucharist inside, that whole room filled with light. So they went back around, and they kept watching, and the priest heard the man's confession, and then the priest gave the man Holy Communion. And as the priest gave the man Holy Communion, they saw that aura of light that had been growing so dim as the man grew closer to death, all of a sudden exploded around him, became bright light around this dying man the moment he swallowed the sacred host. Now, how do you explain that? Bread can't produce that. Only a living person can produce that, and we know who that living person is. That's Jesus. Well, would you believe that the scientist conducting that test was so moved, so incredibly moved by what he saw on the monitor that day, that he left his profession at NASA. He was in his mid-50s and well established in his career. He quit his job to take up a new one. He entered the seminary, and he became a Catholic priest, because he said he wanted to spend the rest of his life at an altar like that, bringing into the world the very Eucharistic Jesus that had produced all the light on that monitor. And that's what that man has been doing for the last several decades. You know the old saying, you are what you eat? Jesus is the light of the world, and the Eucharist is Jesus. Every time we receive the Eucharist, Jesus fills us with light, just like he filled that hospital room with light. And every time we receive the Eucharist, Jesus transforms us into light. I really hope you enjoy receiving communion tonight after being deprived of it for so long. May Jesus in the Eucharist transform each one of you and me into light for our world. Welcome back.